Hi guys. Um, yeah, so I had this. Was thinking about this a little bit today, um, or at least just now. It came to mind, but it's an insight that I maybe have had in the past, and it somewhat relates to personality and the general attitudes people will approach each other with. And we have this valuing in our culture for niceties, and attached to those is a kind of stand for niceness, for using tonal modulation and using specific tones and specific words and specific expressions in an effort in both tact and charm and sincerity to affect the image of a better person, and to make oneself look more acceptable, right? So, this is the kind of I guess to make oneself look more acceptable in the process. And so there's a certain minimum standard of niceness that we are supposed to affect in any given social interaction, depending on the person that you're interacting with and the specific interaction. It's very interesting to me that, the interesting thing to me is that most of these niceties and that most of these standards of niceness happen to be somewhat arbitrary, I guess is the word that I would use to describe it. They feel very artificial. They seem very distracting. They are often not good in situations where genuine conflict is necessary. They feel very constraining most of the time when trying to actually effectively get one's point across. So, essentially, what I'm getting at in this video is the difference between genuine niceness and instrumental niceness. Because we tend to look at the nice person, you know, the nice person or the kind person and think to ourselves, well, that's a good person, right? But interestingly, I don't think that being a nice person is the same as being a good person. And oftentimes, what ends up happening is one can certainly be nice and not be good. And so it's important to be skeptical, I guess, and a bit more Philistine in our social interactions, I guess, or when evaluating others, because niceness can often serve as a kind of, hold on, give me a moment. Niceness can often serve as a kind of disguise from what's underneath, right? And a lot of people really don't consider that if a person affects the proper tone, if they speak in a certain way, they use certain words, they use certain expressions, they use a certain cadence, they use a certain speech, they are regarded as a good person, a trustable person, a reliable person. And this is a bad assumption because the outside doesn't necessarily affect the inside or reflect the inside. And oftentimes, niceness can be instrumental and not necessarily genuine. Um, and so it's really important to be nice genuinely, and I suppose it is important to be nice genuinely, and to not necessarily be nice instrumentally, although being nice instrumentally is important as well. So, um, certainly, right, because much of success in life comes down to how others perceive you and what their opinions are of you. And so there's a certain amount of instrumental niceness that is just essential to social survival. But regardless, obviously, striving to be a bit more genuinely good is more important than being merely nice. Um, because certain, there's a false equivalency between the nice person and the good person, and those are certainly not the same thing. And so, yeah, yeah. So I guess that's the main point that I wanted to make. Um, now, yeah, and in terms of the pragmatics of attempting to identify, you know, it's almost impossible. The thing is just the danger of, I suppose, using this is why niceness is such a great disguise, right? Because uh, very difficult to determine from the outside whether it's genuine or not. Could be genuine, could be affected. Um, but generally speaking, this idea, this seeking, niceness is often affected to bring about some level of social approval. And what constitutes nice is, a lot of tone modulation, facial expressions, speech cadence, and speed. There are a lot of factors that go into the image that the niceness image, I suppose, the appearance of niceness that people try to affect. It's interesting. Often, it's a mechanism for seeking and gaining social approval, which is inherently a selfish act. And so, it's very important to recognize that for any given proposition, right, to say that niceness is inherently a good thing. Well, I think a certain level of courtesy and respect are good things. Courtesy and respect are very good things. But ultimately, and human dignity is at the core of acting with respect and dignity toward others. But niceness does not necessarily need to be a part of that. Often it serves as a distraction. It's inherently selfish. I've to relate this back to MBTI. I've heard a comment that FE is selfish, and FE is a big part of this concept of niceness that we have. This very interesting concept of niceness that we have, and that approval seeking is an inherently selfish and very power concerned act, and those often niceness is very instrumental and has absolutely nothing to do with whether a person is genuinely virtuous or good intentioned. So it's simply important to look beyond appearances and try to see whether there's to be skeptical of appearances, and especially in the social realm, and try to perceive whether there's any actual reality to that appearance, which says nothing because that's obvious. But regardless, it's interesting to me that in many ways the appearance of that niceness can be used as a very clever way to disguise selfishness and truly, you know, yeah, and so I don't when I'm around people. I try my best to exhibit respect and courtesy, um, and with a genuine concern for the human experience and human dignity. But there have been situations where, obviously, I found myself in situations where conflict was necessary and being nice was no longer productive. And those situations arise. When conflict arises, it's very important that urgency be expressed about your cause and that the problem be recognized with a sense of urgency. And so, um, conflict at times require the necessity for productive conflict at times requires us to abandon the comforting disguise of niceness and try to get to the bottom of things in a more blunt and direct way, which is ultimately more productive for everyone and more honest, right? It doesn't give us an excuse to be a dick, but it certainly is true that often niceness is a lie. It's better to be honest, I think. And if that requires a certain amount of hurt feelings, well, so be it, right? At times, feelings are secondary or they're even of. Now, generally, humans are emotional creatures, and so feelings are important, right? I completely acknowledge that. And in most situations, they're very much on my radar and worthy of consideration. But if I have to sacrifice that for the sake of truth and objectivity and accuracy, then it's better to do so. Now, I'm a little more agreeable, so I may at times struggle to reach that ideal. But I think oftentimes niceness does become a bit of a lie. And when someone asks how I am, if it's not disadvantageous to be honest, then I would just choose to be honest and give a negative answer. So, regardless, it's definitely a complicated issue when operating in the world socially, and really trying to get to the bottom of how I best build up my own principles and feelings about that, try to refine my thinking on it. Because often it is the case that feelings, if, but it depends, right? It depends, you know, at times, and everything does depend on something else. And at times, it's important to consider, I guess, the part of showing someone respect and courtesy, which you give them because they have dignity as a human being, is you do try to exhibit a certain level of niceness as a symbol of respect for their dignity as a human being and their experience. So I'm not saying that it's totally irrelevant. I'm just saying that there is another side. There often niceness often becomes very instrumental, and it's not always the case that a nice person is a good person. So it's not really all that complicated, I think, although it could get complicated depending on how you discuss it. But regardless, um, I just have my own thoughts on that. Now, again, when it's necessary to violate, when it's necessary for the sake of objectivity and truth, I guess, to not take, to not treat feelings as where the buck stops, when it's necessary to hurt feelings to get at accuracy, truth, and objectivity. Generally, in most situations, that's more valuable because criticizing another person's point of view or presenting an objection or trying to be argumentatively objective, it's often very good for them. Offering a correction or an objection, it helps to refine their own thinking. You can do it delicately. You don't have to be an asshole about it, but it's generally a good thing to help people think through things if maybe you identify an error in their thinking. And so, that's more important than being nice. Um, on the other hand, in some situations, you won't be able to convince another person that there's an error in their thinking. And when that happens, it may be better or more advantageous to just simply treat them with respect and courtesy in the form of niceness. But, um, because it may not always be advantageous. And as I said, there may be situations where a certain amount of instrumental niceness is necessary to social survival, um, affected niceness, and, but generally that becomes a kind of oppression, a kind of social oppression. And the results of that are far worse. It amounts to a necessary evil because it is a kind of dishonesty. So, to condense my feelings on this, we shouldn't equate a nice person with a good person. Um, Often, niceness becomes a disguise, a clever disguise. Often, niceness becomes dishonest. A certain amount of instrumental niceness is necessary to social survival, although that too is dishonesty, essentially, and it's a necessary evil. In any case, I guess it's only to encourage people to look beyond the curtain a bit and recognize that oftentimes niceness is simply a ploy to gain social approval, which is inherently selfish. And niceness is not an end in of itself. Principally, in most situations, it is of secondary importance. Truth, objectivity, and accuracy are of primary importance at all times, unless the person can't be persuaded of your perspective or see the error in their thinking, in which case there's no point in really bringing any of those things to light per se. and affording someone respect and courtesy in the form of niceness, to the extent niceness can even reflect respect and recognition of their dignity, then in that case niceness should be opted for. But it's a complicated issue, and we shouldn't simply default to being nice um, if there are higher interests at stake. Thank you for watching.